Hey, everybody. I am Stephanie Goss, and this is another episode of the Uncharted Podcast. This week on the podcast, Andy and I are tackling a question from the mailbag, and this might be one of those episodes that gets a little spicy with Andy and Stephanie disagreement, and we take a trip to Camp Tough Love. This was a great question being asked by a practice manager who was writing in to discuss pay, which we all know is everyone's favorite topic in veterinary medicine. This was so much fun. I hope you like it. Let's get into it.
And now, the Uncharted Podcast.
And we are back. It's me, Dr. Andy Roark, and the one and only Stephanie Money. It's a gas. Grab that cash with both hands and make a stash. Goss. I had to go farther because I was like, I think we've done this one before, but also I need to tie it to what we're talking about. Hello there.
We've done so many episodes at this point that I feel like if you have a very varied musical library, you probably have more to choose from. And starts to get repetitive, I suppose, at some point.
So, we're at 300 in some episodes. Okay.
That's a lot of song names.
It's a lot. And I guess, think about this. Okay, so your average classic rock station probably plays about 40 songs. That's probably their list. And so, no shame in this game.
Well, we started with money because we've got a pay conversation today. We had a manager who wrote in and said, I want to discuss pay, which I know is everyone's favorite topic in our field.
Yes.
So it is a manager who's been in practice for a really long time, and they're currently managing a privately owned multi-doctor practice. And overall, they were like, I'm at a great place. We have a great hospital. We have a good culture. Everyone has a fairly good work-life balance. We all really are focused on patient care, and overall, everybody gets along. So pretty good place to work. However, it feels like we're really stuck in the past when it comes to payroll. And so they said, I've been advocating for better team pay, but the practice owner tends to push off raises, and we have a fairly low pay scale. And they are the, kind of practice owner where if it's remotely quiet, they're like, who wants to go home? Let's cut hours, that kind of thing. And they said, that they seem financially well off, and it doesn't seem to register the reality that some of the team faces in terms of living paycheck to paycheck. And there are team members who have either second jobs or side hustles, and the manager is struggling because they said, our practice owner is a wonderful, kind, caring human being, and they are a fantastic doctor. And overall, I'm really proud to work for them. And they often make what feel like really tone-deaf comments when the team is complaining about not having enough hours or wanting raises and that kind of stuff. And so they were like, how do I make it clear that the team is struggling, some of the team, and that this feels like a failure that we really need to address before we potentially lose people? And I just thought that this was such a great, there's so much packed in here. I figured we could unpack it a little.
There's a lot in here. I'm going to go ahead. And give my disclaimer of I'm going to make people unhappy today. I have unpopular thoughts.
Unpopular Andy thoughts. Okay, let's get spicy. Let's do it.
It's not trying to be spicy. It's more of a Camp Tough Love scenario. That's right, Camp Tough Love.
That's what we do at Camp Tough Love.
There's two things in Headspace for me that I want to put up that are kind of important, right? One of the things that I have learned in my career that is just it's like tattooed on my body, and it is.
Says the man with no tattoos.
No tattoos. It is. But you know how there's those lessons that
yes.
I just recite it it's unquestioned. You cannot judge how other people spend their money. Full stop. You just can't. And I've seen this a million different ways. And the first time I saw it was when I was a young doctor, and other doctors would say, or I would look around and say, ooh, how's that person drive a BMW? Ooh,
yes.
Boy,
yes.
That person's got a much nicer, cell phone than I have. And that was back in the day. I had like a flip phone.
Right.
And some of the kennel techs were rocking like smartphones that were much nicer than what I had. And you know what I mean? Again, like, I'm being honest. Like, I think we all, to some degree, it's part of human wiring is to look around and be like, oh, why do they have things that I don't have or whatever? And after that, it was working with practice owners who would look at their staff and say, I see them making these choices and I know what they get for salary, and they go to Starbucks twice a day, every day.
It's the argument about how millennials could totally afford $1 million house if we just quit drinking Starbucks and eating avocado toast.
Exactly right. That's 100% it. And again, and you see that, and you see the rage on both sides. And I say this with love to the writer. It is a dangerous and bad and a game to look at the practice owner and say, he's got plenty of money. Why don't we spend more on salaries and things?
Yes.
And so there is that. But it goes both ways. It really does. And so I just want to put it out. And this person is not wrong to have these thoughts. These are wonderful, compassionate thoughts. This person clearly cares about their team and they're looking out for them.
Yeah.
Camp Tough Love for me is, I hear you, friend, and your heart is in the right place. And this is not good headspace to be in, full stop. And so whether you are the manager looking at the staff and you go, wow, that person's got 4 automobiles, or that person lives in a house that's bigger than mine, or that person buys every video game that comes out. Like, you don't know them. You don't know what their situation is. You don't know what they've got going on. And it was just, your life will be happier if you just chisel that into yourself of, hey, I don't judge how people spend their money. Now, that doesn't mean I don't care and we don't advocate for what we want or what we need. Don't get me wrong. But the first part is there's a moral framing to this when we say, I think he's got the money and he's not spending it. And I go, ooh, now you're getting into morality stuff. And that's just a lot of emotion there. A lot of hurt feelings there. There's the possibility of making people feel judged. And again, there's a real possibility to damage trust when we start talking to people about the choices they make, how they spend their money, even though we don't really know what's going on with them. So that's sort of my sort of first headspace piece.
I agree with that. I think money is one of those emotional topics, right?
Yeah.
No matter, and I mean, just think about it when we think about it in the context of clients and money. We deal with that every day, and we all know the emotional implications of us making assumptions and even just talking about it. It gets emotional, and so I think from the headspace perspective, that was at the top of the list for me. Is that this is probably going to get emotional, just naturally, and wildly uncomfortable. And so buckle up, because no matter how you approach this, there's probably going to be some hardness to the conversations.
Well, I think you're spot on, and a really great call out with the clients, because you're right. We all have learned, I think, hopefully, those of us who have been in the game for a while, those of us who have found out how to be happy in vet medicine, have learned that you do not look at the client's clothes or their car that they pulled up in and say, why didn't they do this? Like, just don't. Just wipe that out of your mind.
It's not worth it.
But it's all the same. They all say the same thing. Okay, cool. The second thing for headspace for me is this, and I think that we can avoid the hard part of this conversation. We have to reframe it. But the second headspace for me is you have to keep a healthy distance from these types of decisions and conversations. Okay? So let me give you an example. So one of the things that we're going through at my house, and this is a thing that we're going through. My wife's parents have recently had some significant health issues, and I love them and I care about them, and she loves them and she cares about them. It has been a real challenge for us because there are things that we look at and we say, hey, this would probably be a good way to go forward. Or these were some things that you could potentially do, that would be beneficial in this situation, and we do not have any control of what they do. We try to be supportive, but it can be hard when you say to someone, hey, I think maybe it might be valuable to have somebody come and help with some care at the house. And they go, we don't want that person. And that's fine. Although, let's be honest, it's challenging when the implication then is you're going to have to come over because we're not going to be able to do things. And then we're going to text you and say, we are not able to do these things and we need you. And so it really, one of the biggest challenge for me in this last year has been wrestling around with acceptance of things where you say, I care about this person and I am affected by the decision this person makes.
Right.
And also, it's not my decision and I can't make them do anything. And so I have got to find peace in understanding that I don't have this control. And that is really hard in life. And so, but I want to bring it up here when I say you can't hold these things too tightly. I think the healthiest place for our writer to be is to say, what you're asking about is important. And it is good to advocate for our staff. All that you can do as the manager is to run the best clinic that you can run with the resources that you are given and in the parameters that you are provided. Like, that's all that you can do. And you cannot get sucked into thinking about what the owner has and why are they not making this choice that I would make? Because you couldn't even have that thought in a corporation. In a corporation, you're spending your days thinking about how the CEO spends his or her money. That's toxic. Well, it feels different because the business owner, but it's really not different as far as the realities of how it affects you. The same thing is true with the staff. There is an art to being amongst your people and your team and caring about them, and also not allowing yourself to go down the path too far of these people need this money, and if I don't get it for them, then their lives are going to be really negatively impacted. That is so much weight you're putting on your own shoulders, and you don't have the power to get them that money. And so just be careful, because there's the ability here to really burn yourself out, to really take on emotional weight that's not healthy. And also the last thing I would say around this is, if you want to be a good and effective negotiator, you have to care, but you can't care too much. And we've all seen that. And so get yourself out of the looking at what people need and what they want and all of those things, and get yourself into the headspace of, what resources do we have that I have access to? How can I support these people given the parameters of the job that I have? And what are my steps going to be going forward? I think this is all about boundary setting, just as far as caring too much about your team. And you can care too much about your team because they're going to live their lives. One time I had a mentor who said to me, because I was guilty of this, I cared really, really deeply, and I felt great guilt about what people would be able to be paid and what we could do. And he said, Andy, you have to remember, these are grown people. And if their needs are not being met, then they're going to go somewhere else. And that's sad, but it's not. They're not going to starve to death. They're going to go do something else. And I think that's the headspace we have to get into, is to say, yeah, that would be awful. And I don't want that. I'm going to try to avoid that. But you're not keeping these people alive. You're not keeping the heat turned on at their house. Like, the worst case is they're going to have to go find something else or do something else. And I don't want that, but it's not a deeply moralistic, catastrophic outcome. You've got to loosen the stakes that you're feeling so that you can be effective.
I hear you, and I think there's pieces of that I disagree with, and I like, we could do 5 podcast episodes out of what you just unpacked there in your work. But I think the biggest thing for me is that I hear you on not getting too emotionally invested, and I think part of your job as a leader and as the de facto HR person in a veterinary practice, as the practice manager, is part of your job is to walk the fine line between advocating for your practice owner and advocating for your team. And so I think that it is really important to look at the reality of running a veterinary practice with an open mind. And to your point, taking the personalization out of it. Stop thinking about the things you can't control, what the practice owner does or doesn't do with their money, what kind of car they drive, all of those things. I think from a headspace perspective, you absolutely have to set all of those aside. And I think it is important to think about what are some of the potential impacts to the practice owner of running a veterinary practice. It is expensive to run a veterinary practice. It is a very high overhead industry. And from a business perspective, there's a lot of financial weight sitting on the shoulders of your practice owner. And so looking at it from their perspective and being able to put yourself into their shoes as well, there may not be any concerns about money if that's the assumption that the team makes, which is understandably when you feel like someone has more than you, it's really easy to go there, right? Well, they have more than me, and so it feels unjust. That may be the case, but it also may be that they are worried about money, that there is some financial insecurity, that there is concerns, because it is really hard to run any business, but veterinary practices are really high overhead businesses. And so that may be a piece of it. And if you assume the worst, you'll never be able to get into a headspace where you might be able to have productive conversation with your practice owner about how you can support them, whether that is maybe there actually is some financial insecurity happening. Maybe there is just a lack of awareness. I have worked with practice owners who truly didn't know how hard it was for the team. Like they just thought, oh, they're working at the ER clinic because they want ER experience and I'm not giving it to them. No, they're working at the ER clinic because they literally can't pay their bills or pay their daycare bill if they don't have extra income. Like I think that there could be lack of awareness. There can also be, a fear of change. Change is hard. And, we are, as human beings, are gonna stay in a place of stillness unless we're forced to move, right? And so I think there's a whole lot of those kind of things from a headspace perspective. And your job as a practice manager is to walk that razor fine line between being able to have empathy for your practice owner and get into some of the potentially emotional conversation with them so that you can also advocate for your team. And I would say the best headspace that you can be in to advocate from your team, and this is where I agree with you, is a very unemotional one. Forget about what their human needs are to a degree and focus on the best chance for success. And I have walked this line and I have fallen right off the edge of the cliff. So I'm saying this with all the love, having screwed this up as many ways as I have gotten it right. And what I would say from having gotten it right, if you can walk the line and have the conversation because you're going into it with a headspace of, hey, these are the things that we as a business get in return when we invest in our team. When you come at it from a logical place and an unemotional place, and you talk about the benefits to the team, we don't have as much turnover when we pay our team really well. We have higher productivity. People who are paid well and who aren't worrying about those other things show up and do their job well in our field. When we think about those things and we think about how we can advocate for the team, if we have the ability to come at it from that headspace of how could paying the team well benefit us as a business, it is going to help you walk that line between where the practice owner might get emotional and where the team's emotional needs clash and meet. Right. And so I do think that it is important to be cognizant of both sides of that. And I do think that it is just our jobs as practice managers to help advocate for the team.
Yeah, I was going to put that in. I think for me, that's the majority of the action steps.
Oh,
in all honesty, that's exactly it. Let's take a break here and then we'll come back and we'll do some action steps. Yeah.
Okay, that sounds good.
All right. I think your headspace is, I think it's great headspace. For me, 100. That's the action steps. I think you're spot on. I guess my question is for you, Stephanie. You say, we need to get into this sort of these harder conversations, and I go, do you? I mean, really, if you think about it, how is asking for raises for the staff any different than asking for new equipment? How is it any different than saying, hey, we don't have an exam rooms, we really need to renovate this building. Like, they all go to the same place, if you frame them that way.
Yeah.
And so you said I would get unemotional. And for me, I go, yes. Like that, to me, that's the action step. And now, again, I never advocated for not advocating. I think you're right on. I think that what you have to do is think about how you're going to be effective here. And so the first thing I would say is make sure you're protecting that relationship with the practice owner. Because if you don't have a trusting relationship, you're going to really struggle. And that's why you have to be so careful about the judgment part or saying, you've got money, why aren't you doing this? It's like, you need that trust. And so don't have them feel judged or damage that trust. Be their partner and know that you support them. And then focus on what they care about and what they understand. Is this a practice owner who is trying to generate revenue? Let's just say that they're money motivated. You can make a very good argument that increasing salaries helps staff retention, which ultimately drives much more revenue. And again, this is, I talk to practice owners a lot. There's two general camps of practice owners. There are some of them who are like, we'll make more money, spend it all. And they struggle. And there's people who go, we are going to be successful by saving our way to success. And they spend nothing and they struggle. So it's always hard to be in the middle. There's never a right or wrong flip the switch. It's always on a spectrum of how much do you do, how little do you do. And again, we really don't know what people are carrying in their personal lives and, and what their expenses are. They might be taking care of parents who have significant medical expenses, whatever. And so what does this person care about? And then let's do some real research. It's easy to say, I feel like the staff doesn't get paid enough. What do your pay scales actually look like compared to benchmark pay scales or other pay scales? Have you actually lost people who left and said, I went to this other place because they pay more? Those things matter. And so when we go back and talk, it would not be about, I think you have enough money and these people, I get the impression they don't have enough money. That's not going to be persuasive. And so try to figure out what the concerns, what the motivators are for the owner, protect that relationship, and then wade in there and do your homework, as Stephanie said, and come to them with good, solid justification for raising staff wages. And there are really great justifications for raising staff wellness. You can justify it from the patient care standpoint. You can justify it from a revenue for the practice standpoint. You can justify it for a doing good in the world standpoint. You can justify it from serving the community better standpoint. Like, there's just a lot of ways that you can make a strong case for this. It really, who you're talking to matters, and then what facts you have to support your argument. And approach it just like you would approach trying to get your practice owner to renovate the building.
Yeah, I love that. I think I also started with the facts and the data, which is in part because that's how my logical brain works, right? And the manager in me wants a spreadsheet. And it is also important to recognize that when we have this conversation, we're going to have this conversation with a human being who might have a different communication style that doesn't lend itself to liking facts and figures, right? A lot of the practice owners I've worked with, you show them a spreadsheet and their eyes gloss over and they immediately check out of the conversation. So your job as the manager is to do your due diligence. And there's two pieces of this. One, I think you hit it right on the head, Andy. You've got to gather the facts and the figures. And part of that has to be the actual concrete feedback from the team, but also the experience of the team, right? To your point, have people left? How many have we lost? What does that look like? Where are we relative to benchmarks? Where are we relative to the other hospitals in our market? All of that is really important information that you need to gather before you sit down and have this conversation. And the second piece of that is you as the manager cannot hope to get what you want out of this scenario and achieve getting increases in wage for the staff if you come to the table and you, Andy, are the practice owner, and I come to you and I say, hey, and I just emotional vomit on you the team's feels about the fact that they're not getting paid enough.
Right.
I've done nothing to actually be your partner as a practice manager, practice owner. All I have done is verbalized and amplified the emotion in the situation. If I come to you and I share some of the reasons why this is coming up in conversation, and I come to you with some suggestions for how we might get to where the team needs or wants to go, that feels radically different. So as a manager, my job is to be a part of the solution. I cannot just come to my partner and say, hey, here's everybody's problem monkeys, and I'm going to set them loose in your office and shut the door behind me, right? I have to be willing to come to the table with a plan and suggestions for how we're going to overcome some of the potential cost objections, cost factors that the practice owner is probably going to raise. That's the other part of my job. And as a manager and as a leader, as a manager, I have to bring those two pieces to the table. I need the facts and the data, and I need a plan. And as a leader, my job is to think about my practice owner's communication style and how they like to receive information. And I need to frame both of those things in a way that is most likely to be received by them well. And so if they are a facts and figures person, great, show them your spreadsheet. If they are a, get to the point, straight shooter, let's just talk about it and move on, unemotional, you better lean in that direction, or they are going to immediately dismiss anything that you say after about 30 seconds, right? So you have to figure out what is the best way for you to present this, and then have the conversation with them and embed both of those two things, your facts and your data and your plan, into their communication style.
Yeah. No, you're totally spot on. One of the points that I really like that you make is, have a plan, have an idea of what this looks like. And then what I would also say too is, I would not go into this expecting your practice owner to go, yep, you know what? Let's ratchet everybody's salaries up.
Yes.
A significant amount across the board. Like, it's terrifying for a lot of people. And a lot of it is,
you got to sit with it.
You got to sit with it. Exactly. So I would say plan on probably an iterative approach of, it's not going to be, everybody's probably going to get a big raise that's probably not going to happen, but that's okay. Start the process, like small incremental increases are much more palatable. And then it means a ton to the staff, at least in that they see that they're going, at least we're moving in the right direction. And it's dangerous for everybody if it gets framed as, this is it, the yes or no question. Right. Everything will be made right, or nothing will be made right. You go, okay. Yeah. I would say try not to think that way. It's just the chances of your success are low. The last thing for me is, I would do all these things. I would go in, think iteratively, things like that. There is a very good chance that you're going to get a no. And it sounds like this person has tried, or they've talked about this before. They've gotten a no. It could happen. The last piece of advice that I have in action steps is intentionally decide to handle no with grace. And what I mean, that does not mean give up. No does not mean never. It means not in this conversation, or not right now. And I have seen young leaders, managers put together amazing presentations and then get told no, and they respond by stamping their feet and saying, well, I'm right, and you should do this. Or the hidden emotions that were sort of judgmental or around morality, at that point they come popping out and go, well, that's because you're a bad person. And go, they might say no. This transition will probably take time no matter what. And so no is not catastrophic. It does not mean that you pack up what you care about and go home. It does not mean that this is not still your number one recommendation for the practice and how you guys should grow. And if you make a really good presentation and they say no, and then you respond emotionally or you stamp your feet, it damages your ability to continue to work on this and to continue to gently advocate along and affect change. And so I have just seen in anything like this that has, money has emotions tied to it, know that people saying no is a possibility. The best leaders can hear no and take no and go away for a little bit and then subtly reintroduce the problem or point out benefits, in other ways as we go along, and they can continue to advocate. And sometimes it just takes people a while to come around. And it's amazing. I'll tell you, as a business owner, there are weeks where everything feels great and we could totally make some changes. And there are weeks where you go, this is not possible right now. And the more that people ask you for raises in that time, the more you dig in your heels and go, we are not doing that. And I feel unappreciated, at the same time. So anyway, but that's what I got for action steps.
I love it. I think this was fun to unpack a little. I hope that helped our writer a little bit feel like they have an idea of how to approach the conversation with the practice owner. Clear, but unemotional is probably your best choice.
Totally. Absolutely. Cool. Well, thanks for being here, guys. Thanks for everybody writing in. If you've got a question for us, send it to podcast@unchartedvet.com.
Yep. Take care, everyone.
See you, everybody.
And that's a wrap on another episode of the Uncharted Podcast. Thanks for joining us and spending your week with us. If you enjoyed this week's episode, head over to wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a review. It's the best way to let us know that you love listening. We'll see you next time.